This week will be the first of 2 weeks about muscles. If you'll look at the syllabus or the schedule, that's all we're doing for the rest of the semester. So there's plenty to cover. If you look at the syllabus, this first week is about muscle anatomy, muscle fiber, and the sarcomere. And then for the next semester, or next week, we'll save the sliding filament theory and the neuromuscular junction, blah, 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 blah. So there's plenty to cover, and that will take us all the way into the end of the semester and into the final. And there's definitely things that we are going to skip. Dr. Lynn did not have us covering everything, and so when you start A&P2, you will pick up where we left off. But even before we get into muscle anatomy, we have to do a little bit more kind of backstory. And so we're going to do part of chapter 10 before we go into chapter 11. And like I said, you're going to basically pick up, we're going to leave off the memorization of all these muscles for A&P2. And that's where you're going to start with A&P2. So you'll be excited that we'll skip it for now, but just realize that in A&P2 you will have to do it. So before we get into anything else, we need to just kind of do an overview of the muscle system before we talk about where they all are. Let's talk about functions. So there are 600 human skeletal muscles, and they are about half of our weight. You already know from looking at tissues that there are 3 types of muscle tissue: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. And these tissues all are specialized for one purpose, and that is converting the chemical energy into ATP into the mechanical energy of motion. We know that our muscles contract, and we know that because of that contraction that we have some movements, but that's really not all there is to it. There's more than that. So, functions of muscles. There's 2 slides of this. Movement, of course, is the number one. That's easy. Move the body from place to place. But even more important than that, movement of our body parts and contents. So, muscles play a role in our breathing, circulation, feeding, digestion, defecation, urination, and childbirth. Oh my goodness. And they also help our role in communication, speech, writing, and nonverbal communications. So we think about just our arm moving or our legs walking, but it's way more than that. Muscles also maintain our stability by maintaining our posture and preventing any unwanted movements, and they stabilize our joints. The third one, and I think this might possibly be one of the most important functions, is they control the openings and passageways within our body. So you're going to see the word sphincter here if you haven't before. Those are muscular rings that are internal that control the movement of food, bile, blood, and other materials. We have them throughout the digestive system and other places throughout the body as well. Heat production. Skeletal muscles produce as much as 85% of our body heat. We talk about endothermic animals or warm-blooded animals. Well, it's not really warm blood. It's that we have the ability to produce some heat with our skeletal muscles. And then last is glycemic control. Muscles are a major factor in the control of blood glucose. So they absorb a lot of blood glucose to produce this motion. And they also help with storage and the metabolism, kind of maintaining that correct blood glucose level. Okay, so we're going to take a closer look at this picture in the next video, but this is kind of a inside look at a muscle. And be careful on these muscle pictures, kind of what you're looking at, or just be careful. Some of them show the muscle fiber, some of them don't. Some of them start at the muscle fiber. Just be careful because there's lots of different layers. So we're kind of looking at the whole muscle. As you can see the label there of skeletal muscle, and then within that we have these fascicles, which is basically a bundle of muscle fibers. And muscle fiber is a weird term because that's actually one cell. And sometimes we forget that just because it's called a muscle fiber. And then you see the epimysium, perimysium, endomysium. Those are membranes that we're going to see around a certain level or a certain layer of muscle. So the epimysium covers the entire muscle. The perimysium covers a fascicle. And then the endomysium covers one muscle fiber, which is one cell. And then this shows the tendon, which is connecting the bone to the muscle. So those are all the connective tissues. It shows the fascia as well. So these pictures, again, sometimes can be a little bit misleading. Sometimes you're kind of confused as to am I looking at a whole muscle? Am I looking at a fiber? So just make sure you kind of get your bearings. But this is specifically showing you the connective tissues. So endomysium is connective tissue surrounding each muscle fiber. This is going from smallest to biggest. So that is basically covering each cell, but the cell is called a fiber. And then perimysium is a thicker layer surrounding the fascicle. A fascicle is a bundle of muscle fibers that are wrapped together in perimysium. In that perimysium can also be some larger nerves and blood vessels. And then larger than that, or bigger than that, is the epimysium. And that is the connective tissue, the fibrous sheath around the entire muscle. The outer surface blends into the fascia, but the inner surface is sending projections between the fascicles. And that's what forms the perimysium. And the fascia is sheets of connective tissue that separate neighboring muscles or muscle groups from each other. And you should be able to see that pretty clear when you are in the lab or even just looking in your lab manual, the pictures. So here is a microscopic view of those connective tissue layers. Again, it's kind of hard to get your bearings here, but it's kind of labels that what a fascicle is and then what a muscle fiber is. And so you can see each layer of connective tissue. So notice in this there's longitudinal sections and cross sections, so be careful. Okay, we're also going to look at the classification of muscles, or kind of types of muscles. That's how I think about it. And this is according to fascicle orientation, but it kind of is also, in my opinion, it is more like shape. These are different different types of muscles. I'm going to fast forward to the pictures because I think that's where it's easier. So technically, we're looking at the fascicles, but a fascicle is just a group of fibers. But you can see in all of those different types, the fascicles kind of have a different orientation. But I think it helps to just kind of look at these overall shapes, not just the fascicle. So let's go back and look. Fusiform muscles have thick in the middle and tapered at the ends. These are probably what you're used to thinking about your biceps brachii. Parallel have a uniform width and parallel fascicles. Triangular are fan-shaped. Pinnate muscles are kind of feather-shaped. And then circular muscles are those sphincters that we talked about earlier. Those there are a ring around, not only, this says body opening, it's not only the body opening, there's sphincters at organ openings as well, but the orbicularis oculi is an example as well. And these names, we'll get to naming here in a little bit. You're probably like, oh my goodness, those are lots of words. But actually the naming is not too bad. So those are our different types of muscles. And then the middle, okay, well, let's backtrack. So it shows the fascicles are in the pink, and then you see the tendon. It says the strength of the muscle and the direction of its pull are determined partly by the orientation of the fascicles. And usually how that tendon is connected is pulling in kind of in the same orientation of the fascicle. So the tendon is the indirect attachment to the bone. It is bridge the gaps between the end of the muscle and the bone. And then we also can have direct attachment to the bone. That when we have that, there's barely any separation between the muscle and the bone, and the muscle seems to emerge directly from the bone. Some skeletal muscles don't insert on a bone at all, but in the dermis of the skin, and those are muscles of our facial expression. So again, we're going to save all this for A&P 2, but each muscle will have a belly, and that's kind of the middle of the muscle, and an insertion and origin. So the origin is the bony attachment at the stationary end of the muscle, the end of the muscle that is not moving, and the insertion is the attachment at the other end, which is the mobile end of the muscle. Again, you'll need to be naming muscles, know their origin and insertion later, but we're going to save all that for A&P 2. I'm going to save this also for later. May come back to it, but we may not. Nerves are stimulating these muscles. So the innervation of a muscle is the identity of the nerve that stimulates it. Again, you'll have to memorize that when you get through to memorizing these muscles, but we're not going to here. But it does talk about the diagnosis of a nerve, the spinal cord and brainstem injuries do have effects on muscle function because they're not stimulating those muscles. And then talks about spinal nerves and cranial nerves. So when you get to A&P2, you'll want to come back to this kind of learning strategy. There's a lot that goes into memorizing the muscles, so you'll want to look at models and cadavers and lots of pictures in your lab manual. You'll want to try to find it on yourself and palpate it if you can. And helping to find the origins and insertions do help to memorize the muscles, I think, because the muscle name is usually describes the location, appearance, origin, insertion, or action. So if you kind of learn what the name is behind or what kind of the reason for the name, then it's going to help understand where the muscle is and possibly the origin or insertion.